The station world Anthara was old. It was older than most civilizations that walked its halls. It floated in the pale light of a dying white dwarf star, and its metal corridors stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Millions of alien beings lived and worked inside it. At its heart sat the Galactic Council Chamber, a vast, circular room carved from black stone, where representatives of 43 species decided the fate of the known galaxy. On this particular day, the chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Diplomats, warlords, scholars, and traders from across 100 star systems had gathered, because something unusual was happening. A new species had arrived. They called themselves humans. The Earth vessel Horizon's Edge had docked at Anthara's outer ring 6 hours earlier. It was a small ship. Compared to the massive cruisers and carriers that filled the station's ports, it looked like a toy. The aliens who saw it pass through the docking gates had stared at it, with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Some had laughed openly. Now, the human delegation walked through the council chamber's main doors. There were 5 of them. At the front was Shin Jungwoo, Earth's first diplomatic envoy to the galactic community. He was a tall man, with a calm face and careful eyes. He wore a simple dark suit with a small Earth flag pinned to his chest. Behind him walked Captain Han Do-yoon, the commander of the Horizon's Edge. Do-yoon was broad-shouldered and quiet. His eyes moved constantly, studying the room, measuring exits and distances out of habit. Beside him was Park So-mi, the ship's chief science officer. She was small and sharp, and she had spent the last 3 years learning alien languages from intercepted transmissions. Next came Yoon Tae-ho, the tactical commander. He was a soldier, and he looked like one. His back was straight, his jaw was tight, and his hands hung loose at his sides, always ready. Last was Baek Nari, the ship's engineer. She had grease under her fingernails and a quiet confidence in her step. The 5 humans walked down the long central aisle of the chamber. On either side, alien beings of every shape and size watched them pass. Some were tall and thin like glass. Some were short and heavy like boulders. Some floated, some crawled. Some had no bodies at all and existed only as shimmering fields of light. None of them looked impressed. Jungwoo reached the speaking platform at the center of the chamber. He looked up at the Elder Council, the 12 most ancient and powerful species in the galaxy, seated on a raised tier above him. At the center sat Orvon, the council elder. Orvon was a crystalline being, over 4 meters tall, with a body that looked like it was made of living ice. Light passed through him and scattered in rainbow patterns across the walls. He was over 12,000 years old. Jungwoo bowed respectfully. He took a breath. Then he spoke. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," he said. His voice was steady. "I am Shin Jungwoo, representative of the planet Earth and the human species. We come in peace, we come with respect, and we come to formally request membership in the Galactic Accord." Silence. Then from the far left of the elder tier, a sound. It was laughter. It came from Dreth, the warlord admiral of the Kalith Dominion. Dreth was massive, a reptilian creature with dark red scales and 4 arms, each one thick with muscle. His teeth were long and sharp, and when he laughed, the sound was like rocks grinding together. "Membership?" Dreth said. He leaned forward, his yellow eyes fixed on Jungwoo. Your species is barely 300,000 years old. You only just learned to leave your own planet. My people were conquering star systems when yours was still living in caves and eating raw meat. He spread all 4 arms wide. You are Tier 9, the lowest of the low. You are not even civilized by our standards, and you want to sit with us? More laughter filled the chamber. Not all of it was cruel. Some of it was simply the sound of beings who genuinely could not believe what they were hearing. To them, it was like an insect asking to join a council of gods. Somi's hands tightened at her sides. Teho's jaw clenched. Nari looked at the floor, then back up, her eyes hard. Doyun did not move. He simply watched. Jungwoo did not flinch. He waited for the laughter to die, and then he spoke again. "We understand that we are young," he said. "We understand that we are small. But we believe that every species, regardless of age, has something to offer. We ask only for a chance." Orvan raised one crystalline hand, and the chamber quieted. He looked down at Jungwoo with something that might have been pity. "Your request is noted," Orvan said. His voice was deep and musical, like wind through a glass canyon. "But the accord has requirements. A species must demonstrate stability, technological maturity, and cultural significance. Your people have not yet met these thresholds. I am sorry." That was the end of it. No vote, no debate. Just a polite rejection from a being who had been alive since before humans invented writing. The human delegation turned and walked back up the long aisle. The aliens watched them go. Some had already lost interest. Others whispered to each other in languages Somi could only half understand. But in the farthest corner of the chamber, in an alcove so dark it seemed to swallow light, something stirred. It was called the Pale One. No one knew its real name. No one knew what species it had once been. It was ancient, so ancient that even Orvan spoke of it with reverence. It had sat in that alcove for centuries, silent, unmoving, watching the galaxy pass by with eyes that had seen more than any living thing. Now, for the first time in 1,000 years, it moved. Its head turned slowly, and its pale, empty eyes followed the 5 humans as they walked toward the exit. It watched them until they were gone. Outside the chamber, the humans walked in silence. The humiliation sat heavy on all of them. Teho's fists were clenched. Sami's eyes were wet, though she would never admit it. Then footsteps behind them. Quick, light footsteps. They turned. A small alien was hurrying toward them. She was young, barely adult by her species standards, with soft blue skin and wide, dark eyes. Her name was Lumi, and she was an aide to the council. She stopped in front of Jungwoo, slightly out of breath. "I should not be telling you this," she said quietly. "But something happened in there that has not happened in a very long time. The Pale One watched you. It has not watched anything in 1,000 years. She paused, her dark eyes serious. "I do not know what it means, but I think you should be careful, and I think you should not give up." Then she turned and hurried back the way she had come, leaving the 5 humans standing alone in the cold metal corridor of a station that did not want them. Doyun looked at Jungwoo. Jungwoo looked back. Neither of them said a word. But something passed between them, something quiet and stubborn and very, very human. 3 weeks passed after the humiliation at the council. The humans returned to their small corner of the galaxy and tried to continue with their lives. Colony Maru, a mining settlement on a cold, rocky world near the edge of human-explored space, kept digging. 40,000 people lived there. Miners, engineers, teachers, children. It was not an important place by galactic standards. It did not have rare minerals or strategic value. It was just a small town on a small planet, full of ordinary people trying to build something. That was why Dreth chose it. The Calith Dominion Warfleet arrived without warning. 19 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took positions around Colony Maru's planet. Each ship was enormous, dark red, covered in heavy armor, bristling with weapons. The smallest of them was 10 times the size of the Horizon's Edge. Dreth himself commanded from the lead vessel, the Crimson Throne. He opened a wideband transmission that every human in the colony could hear. His voice filled every speaker, every screen, every communication device on the planet. "Humans," he said, "this world now belongs to the Caliph Dominion. You have 6 hours to evacuate. Take nothing. Leave everything. If even one human remains on this planet after 6 hours, we will cleanse it." This is not a negotiation. The transmission ended. The people of Colony Maru stood frozen in their homes, their workplaces, their schools. 40,000 people, 6 hours. They did not have enough transport ships to evacuate everyone in 6 hours. They did not even have enough for half. The distress signal went out immediately. It traveled at the speed of light, bouncing through relay stations, reaching every human ship and outpost within range. The closest vessel was the Horizon's Edge. Captain Han Doyan received the signal on his bridge. He read it once. Then he looked at his crew. Park Somi was already running calculations. Her face was pale. 19 warships, she said quietly. All Tier 3 military grade. We are 1 frigate. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Yun Taeho stood at the tactical console. He said nothing. He simply began loading weapons. Every missile tube, every energy cannon, every defensive system the ship had. He worked calmly and efficiently, like a man getting ready for a day at work. Baek Nari was in the engine room. When the signal came through, she put down her tools, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and then started rerouting power. She pulled energy from lights, from heating, from every non-essential system on the ship, and pushed it all into the shields and engines. The corridors went dark. The air grew cold. But the ship was as strong as she could make it. Doyan opened a channel to the Caliph fleet. "This is Captain Han Doyan of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge," he said. His voice was calm. Not brave calm, not pretending calm, just calm. The calm of a man who had already made his decision. "Colony Maru is a human settlement. These are our people. We are not leaving." Dret's face appeared on the screen. The Warlord Admiral looked amused. "1 ship," he said, showing his teeth. "You bring 1 ship against 19. Is this courage, human, or is it stupidity?" "Come find out," Doyan said, and cut the channel. Far away, on Anthara, Shin Jung-woo was running. He had received the same distress signal, and he was running through the metal corridors of the station world toward the council chamber. He burst through the doors, breaking every rule of diplomatic behavior, and shouted for the council's attention. "The Caliph Dominion is attacking a human colony," he said, breathing hard. 40,000 civilians, women, children. They have 6 hours. I am asking, I am begging this council to intervene. The chamber stirred. Diplomats looked at each other. Some looked concerned. Most looked uncomfortable. Orvan, the elder, raised his crystalline hand for silence. He looked at Jung-woo with those ancient, light-filled eyes. "I understand your distress," Orvan said slowly, "but the territory in question is unregistered. Under Galactic Accord law, any Tier 3 or higher civilization may claim unregistered territory. The Caliph Dominion is within its legal rights." "Legal rights?" Jung-woo's voice cracked. "There are children on that planet." "I am sorry," Orvan said, but meaning it was not enough. Jung-woo looked around the chamber. 43 species, hundreds of diplomats, thousands of years of civilization, and not one of them would help. Then the shadows moved. From the dark alcove in the farthest corner of the chamber, the Pale One spoke. Its voice was not loud. It was barely above a whisper. But the moment it spoke, every being in the chamber fell silent. It was the kind of silence that comes from deep, ancient fear. The silence of creatures who know they are hearing something that matters. I have seen this before, the Pale One said. Its voice was dry and old, like wind over dead stone. I watched the Vren do this. They found a young species. They pushed it. They thought it was weak. The Vren are gone now. I watched the Solhari do the same. They are gone too. I watched the Yithkai. Gone. All of them gone. The Pale One's empty eyes swept across the chamber. Do not provoke the humans. The silence that followed was absolute. Orvan stared. Lumi, standing near the back, felt the hair on her arms rise. Several diplomats looked at each other with something new in their eyes. Not concern, but the first small seed of fear. Then, from the holographic link on the far wall, Dreth's laughter filled the chamber. He had been listening. His image flickered, massive and red, and full of contempt. The Pale One speaks riddles, Dreth said. I do not fear riddles, and I do not fear humans. He cut the link. Jungwoo stood alone on the speaking platform, surrounded by silence. No one moved to help. No one spoke. The Pale One had already retreated into its shadows. Back at Colony Maru, the evacuation had begun. Transport ships were loading as fast as they could. Families were separated. Parents put children on ships and stayed behind because there was no room. People carried nothing. They just ran. Above them, the horizon's edge moved into position between the colony and the Kalith fleet. One small ship. One thin line between 19 warships and 40,000 lives. On the bridge, Doyun sat in his captain's chair. Somi stood beside him, her data screens showing numbers that all said the same thing. They could not win this fight. Taeho was at his station, weapons armed and ready. Nari's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. Shields at maximum. Engines ready. I gave you everything I have, Captain. Doyun nodded slowly. He looked at each of them. These people. His people. All hands, he said, his voice carrying through every speaker on the ship. Battle stations. Our job is simple. We buy time. We keep them away from those transports for as long as we can, and we make them remember our names. He paused. It has been an honor. The Kalith fleet began to move. 19 warships, weapons glowing, advanced toward Colony Maru, and the horizon's edge flew forward to meet them, alone. The first Kalith shot missed. The second did not. The horizon's edge shook violently as the energy blast struck its forward shields. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. Nari grabbed a pipe in the engine room to keep herself from falling, and immediately began rerouting power to fill the gap in the shield grid. Shields holding, she reported. Barely. On the bridge, Captain Han Doyen did not waste a single second. He pushed the ship forward, not away from the Kalith fleet, but directly into it. Full speed, he ordered. Take us right into their formation. Park Somi looked at him. Captain, that will put us inside their weapons range. It will also put us inside their formation, Doyen said. They cannot fire their heavy weapons without hitting each other. Close range is the only chance we have. It was insane. Every tactical manual in the galaxy said that a smaller ship should keep its distance, use speed, stay mobile. No one flew into the middle of a superior fleet. It was suicide. Doyun flew into the middle of the fleet. The horizon's edge dove between the massive Kalith warships like a bird flying between mountains. Yun Taeho fired everything, missiles, energy cannons, point defense guns, in every direction. At this range, he could not miss. Neither could the Kalith, but every shot they fired at the horizon's edge risked hitting their own ships. The Kalith formation broke apart in confusion. Dreth roared orders from the Crimson Throne, but his captains were panicking. They had trained for fleet battles against other fleets. They had not trained for a single ship diving into their ranks like a mad animal. 2 Kalith ships collided trying to get a clear shot. A third took a missile from Taeho straight through its engine section and began to drift, burning. The galaxy watched. Every species with sensor stations in the region picked up the battle data. On in Thara, the council chamber's central display showed the fight in real time. Hundreds of alien diplomats stood in silence, watching a single Tier 9 frigate tear through a Tier 3 warfleet. Orvan's crystalline body flickered with light, a sign of strong emotion in his species. Lumi stood near the back of the chamber with her hands pressed against her mouth, her dark eyes wide. But the numbers were still the numbers. 1 ship against 19, now 16, after the damage Doyen had done, was still impossible. The Horizon's Edge was taking hits. Each one cost them something. A weapon array, a shield section, a piece of hull. Then a direct hit struck the engine room. The blast threw Nari across the room. She hit the far wall hard and tasted blood. Around her, the main engines died. Power dropped. The ship slowed, then stopped. She pulled herself up, looked at the damage, and felt her stomach drop. "Captain," she said into the intercom. Her voice was steady, but quiet. "Engines are gone. I cannot fix them. Not in time." On the bridge, Doyun closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Behind them, the evacuation transports were still launching from Colony Maru. Thousands of people were on those ships. Thousands more were still on the ground, waiting. "How long until all transports are away?" he asked. Somi checked her screens. 20 minutes, maybe more. 20 minutes, with no engines, surrounded by 16 warships. Doyun opened his eyes. "Teho," he said, "I need a path to the Crimson Throne." Teho looked at him. For a long moment, the tactical commander said nothing. Then he understood. "You want to ram it," Teho said. "I want to put our ship inside their flagship," Doyen said. "We still have maneuvering thrusters. Enough for 1 burn. If we lodge ourselves in their hangar bay, they cannot move, they cannot command, and their fleet loses its head. And then you take a boarding team inside." "A boarding team?" Teho repeated. "On foot, inside a Caliph warship." "On foot," Do-Yun confirmed. Teho smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting his whole life for something exactly this impossible. "Give me 10 volunteers," Teho said. He got 40. Nari used the last of the maneuvering fuel to aim the Horizon's Edge at the Crimson Throne. The crippled frigate drifted forward on one final burn, picking up speed. The Caliph fired at it, but at this range and angle, most shots missed or struck glancing blows. The Horizon's Edge hit the Crimson Throne's hangar bay at full sublight speed. The impact was tremendous. Metal screamed against metal. The frigate's nose crumpled, then punched through the hangar doors, then kept going. The Horizon's Edge burying itself in the belly of the Caliph flagship like a knife in flesh. The Crimson Throne's engines flickered and died. On the council chamber display, every alien watching saw a Tier 9 ship physically embedded in a Tier 3 flagship. Nobody laughed this time. Teho moved fast. He had his team ready, 40 humans in light combat armor, carrying rifles, grenades, and cutting tools. They poured out of the Horizon's Edge through the torn metal of the hangar bay and into the Crimson Throne. The inside of a Caliph warship was not built for humans. The corridors were too wide, the ceilings too high, the air too hot. Everything was dark red metal and sharp edges. And it was full of Caliph soldiers, each one twice the size of a human, with 4 arms and natural armor plating on their skin. It did not matter. Teho's team fought through the corridors with a speed and aggression that the Caliph had never faced. Humans were smaller, yes. Weaker, yes. But they were fast. They communicated constantly. Short, sharp words, hand signals, a coordination that came from something deeper than training. They covered each other. They pulled wounded comrades to safety. When one human fell, 2 more stepped forward. The Caliph fought back hard. They were warriors. They had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never fought anything like this. The humans did not stop. They did not slow down. When they ran out of ammunition, they used their rifles as clubs. When their rifles broke, they used their knives. When their knives were lost, they used their hands. On Anthara, Orvan turned to the Pale One. The elder's voice was barely a whisper. "What are they?" he asked. The Pale One's ancient eyes were fixed on the display. It watched the humans fighting through the corridors of the Crimson Throne. It watched Teho kick open a sealed door. It watched a wounded soldier drag herself forward with one arm to keep firing. It watched all of it. Then it spoke. "They are the only species I have ever seen that runs toward danger," the Pale One said. "Not for territory, not for power, not for resources. Doyun is dying in that ship. He knows this. He has known since the moment he flew forward. He does not fight because he believes he can win. He fights because 40,000 people behind him cannot fight for themselves." The Pale One paused. The chamber was completely silent. "Every species in this council conquers for gain," it continued. "Humans fight for each other. A human will die for a stranger, not because the stranger is valuable, not because there is a reward, simply because the stranger needed help and the human was there. I have watched this galaxy for longer than any of you can understand. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen species that could destroy stars, and none of them, not one, were as dangerous as a species that has decided something is worth dying for." Its pale eyes swept the chamber one final time. "That is why I told you not to provoke them, because once they decide to fight, nothing in this galaxy will stop them." On the Crimson Throne, Teho's team reached the bridge. The doors blew open. Kalith officers turned, weapons raised. Teho stepped through the smoke. Dreth was standing at the center of his own bridge, all four arms raised, teeth bared. But his eyes, those yellow predator eyes, held something new. Something he had never felt before in his long life of conquest and war. Fear. Teho raised his rifle. "You're done," he said. The silence after a battle is a strange thing. It is not peaceful. It is the silence of broken metal floating in space, of fires burning without oxygen and dying in seconds, of bodies drifting in the dark. It is the silence of things that will never be fixed. The Battle of Colony Maru was over. The Kalith flagship Crimson Throne drifted in orbit, dead and dark, with the horizon's edge still buried in its belly like a broken spear. The remaining Kalith warships, 12 of the original 19, had retreated in disorder the moment their flagship went silent. Without Dreth's commands, without their command ship, the fleet had no direction. They ran. Below, on the surface of Colony Maru, a last evacuation transports lifted off. Every single civilian made it out. 40,000 people, all of them alive. The cost was something else. The horizon's edge was destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. Its hull was torn open. Its engines were dead, and most of its internal systems had been crushed in the impact with the Crimson Throne. 23 crew members were dead. 11 more were critically wounded. Captain Han Doyun was among the wounded. The impact had thrown him from his chair and slammed him into the forward console. His spine was fractured in 2 places. When the medical team pulled him from the wreckage, he was conscious but could not feel his legs. He looked up at the medic working on him and asked only one question. "Did the transports get out?" "All of them, Captain." Doyun closed his eyes and said nothing more. Park Somi had coordinated the entire evacuation from a damaged console with half her screens dead. She had tracked 40,000 civilians, managed transport schedules, calculated escape routes, and communicated with panicking colony officials, all while the ship was being torn apart around her. When the battle ended, she sat down on the floor of the bridge and stared at nothing. She had not slept in 4 days. A medic found her 20 minutes later, unconscious. Her body had simply stopped. Yoon Taeho's boarding team held the Crimson Throne's bridge. Dreth was a prisoner, disarmed, bound with magnetic restraints, and sitting in the corner of his own command center, with the bitter expression of a predator who had become prey. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence said everything. Baek Nari crawled out of the engine room with burns on her arms and a deep cut across her forehead. She stood in what was left of the horizon's edge and looked around at the wreckage. This had been her ship. She had known every pipe, every wire, every vibration of its engines. She had loved it the way some people love their homes. It was gone. She wiped the blood from her face, and something in her eyes changed. Not sadness, something that looked a lot like a decision. The footage of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Sensor data, visual recordings, communication intercepts, all of it was transmitted, copied, shared, and watched by billions of beings on thousands of worlds. They saw one small ship fly into a fleet of 19. They saw it fight. They saw it ram a flagship. They saw humans, small, soft, short-lived humans, board a Caliph warship on foot and take it. They saw a Tier 9 species defeat a Tier 3 empire. The reactions were not all the same. Some species were inspired. The Fenari, a small peaceful civilization that had been bullied by the Caliph for centuries, held public gatherings to watch the footage. Fenari children drew pictures of the horizon's edge. The Uthran, another young species that had been denied council membership, sent a quiet, encrypted message to Earth's communication network. It said simply, "We saw. We remember." Other species were afraid. The Caliph were not the only aggressive empire in the galaxy. The Drothar hegemony, the Vest Collective, the Iron Chorus, all of them watched the footage and felt something uncomfortable. If humans could do this with one ship, what would they do with 100? On Earth, the reaction was immediate and united. The governments of Earth had spent decades arguing with each other about space funding, military priorities, and colonial policy. That ended in one day. The footage from Colony Maru was played on every screen on the planet. People saw their own kind, miners, engineers, soldiers, ordinary people, fight against impossible odds to protect strangers. Within 1 week, the United Earth Council approved the largest military construction program in human history. Not one ship, not 10 ships, 74 warships, a full fleet, built from scratch, designed from the ground up, using everything humanity had learned from the battle. Nari led the engineering effort. She did not sleep much. She did not need to. The anger inside her was better than sleep. She had lost her ship, her crewmates, and her captain's legs. She was not going to lose anything else. She did not build copies of the horizon's edge. She built something new, something that carried a lesson she had learned at Colony Maru, that a human ship's final moment could be its most powerful. She designed a reactor system she called the Promise. If a ship was going to die, its crew could trigger an override. The reactor would overload and detonate with the force of a small star. Every human ship would carry the Promise. Every human ship, in its last breath, would become a weapon. It was a terrible thing to build. Nari knew that. She built it anyway. On Anthara, Shin Jung-woo returned to the council chamber. But this time, he was not asking for a seat. He was not begging. He stood on the speaking platform and looked up at the elder council with the face of a man who had watched his people bleed while the galaxy did nothing. Earth will defend its people, he said, wherever they are. If the Galactic Accord cannot protect human lives, then humans will protect human lives. This is not a threat. It is a fact. He turned and walked out. Orvan watched him go. The elder was troubled. He had lived for 12,000 years, and he recognized the look in Jungwoo's eyes. It was the look of a species that had been pushed past a line, pushed into something new. Quietly, privately, Orvan began reaching out to other species, the Fenari, the Uthrin, others, small young civilizations that had watched Colony Maru and felt something stir inside them. Hope, maybe, or courage, or simply the idea that things did not have to stay the way they were. Then something unexpected happened. The Pale One requested a private meeting with Jungwoo. In all of recorded galactic history, the Pale One had never requested a meeting with anyone. Jungwoo came alone to the dark alcove in the council chamber and stood before the ancient being. The Pale One looked at him for a long time. Then it spoke, and what it said changed everything Jungwoo understood about the galaxy. "I am not merely old," the Pale One said. "I am the last survivor of the first civilization. My people existed before this galaxy had its current shape. Billions of years ago. Everyone I knew is dust. Every world I loved is gone. I have watched every empire that followed, thousands of them, rise and fall. I have seen more death than you can imagine." It leaned forward, and its pale eyes held Jungwoo's. "In all that time, I have never seen a species like yours. You are not the strongest. You are not the smartest. You are not the oldest. But you are the most relentless. You bond with anything, with animals, with machines, with strangers you have never met. You will die for people who cannot repay you. You strap fire to your backs and ride it into empty space, because you are curious about what is out there." The Pale One paused. "I told the council not to provoke you, but I did not say it to protect you, Jungwoo. I said it to protect them, because this galaxy has forgotten what happens when it gives a species like yours a reason to fight." Jungwoo stood in the darkness, listening, and felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. Far away, in the deep red heart of Kalit space, the Dominion High Command gathered in secret. Dreth was captured, yes. The Crimson Throne was lost. But the Kalith were not a species that accepted shame. They did not negotiate. They escalated. The full Kalith war machine began to move. Not a fleet this time, an armada. 10,000 warships, drawn from every corner of the Dominion, carrying the combined military power of a civilization that had been conquering worlds for 2 million years. They pointed it all at Earth. And they began to march. They came out of the dark like a tide. 10,000 Kalith warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. They filled the sensor screens of every human station, every satellite, every ship. The readings were so dense that the computers could not separate individual vessels. They just showed a wall of red, stretching from one side of the display to the other. It was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in 5,000 years. The Kalith had emptied their empire for this. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon. Their orders were not complicated. They were going to burn Earth until nothing was left. Not a city, not a person, not a memory. Humanity's fleet, 74 ships, built in desperate haste over the past months, formed a defensive line near the orbit of Mars. 74 against 10,000. The math was terrible. On the bridge of the newly built flagship Undying Soul, Captain Han Do-yoon sat in his command chair. He was in a wheelchair now. His legs were dead below the waist, and they would stay that way. The doctors had told him he should not be here. He had ignored them. His uniform was pressed, his eyes were clear. He was exactly where he needed to be. Park Somi stood at the science station beside him. She had not fully recovered from the exhaustion of Colony Maru, and there were dark circles under her eyes that might never go away. But her hands were steady on her console, and her mind was sharp. Yun Teho commanded the vanguard, the first 12 ships in the formation, the ones that would take the initial wave. He sat on his own bridge, calm and focused, his weapons already armed. Baek Nari was aboard the Undying Soul, in its engine room. She had built this ship with her own hands. She knew every bolt, every wire, every hidden system. Including the Promise. Every ship in the fleet carried it. Every captain knew what it meant. If your ship was dying, you could take the enemy with you. It was the most human weapon ever built. A final act of defiance. A refusal to die quietly. Doyen opened a fleet-wide channel. His voice reached every ship, every crew member, every person in the line. "This is Captain Doyen," he said. "I will not give you a long speech. You know why we are here. You know what is behind us. Earth, our home, everyone we have ever loved. I cannot promise we will survive today, but I can promise you this. They will not get past us without paying a price that this galaxy will remember for 10,000 years. He paused. Make them remember. The Caliph advanced. The space between the two forces shrank. Weapons charged. Targeting systems locked. For one long, terrible moment, the entire Sol system held its breath. Then the sky caught fire. The first wave hit Teho's vanguard like a hammer. Caliph weapons lit up the darkness. Thousands of energy beams and missile salvos converging on 12 human ships. Teho's formation scattered and reformed, moving through the incoming fire with a coordination that no alien species could match. Humans talked to each other constantly in battle. Short words, quick adjustments, instinctive cooperation. They fought as a single organism. But 12 ships against 10,000 was not a battle. It was a delay. Teho lost his first ship within 4 minutes, then a second, then a third. Each time a human vessel died, its reactors screamed and the Promise activated. The ship detonated in a blinding explosion that swallowed nearby Caliph warships in a sphere of nuclear fire. The Caliph had not expected this. They had expected defeated ships to drift and die. Instead, every human death was a bomb. The main fleet engaged. 74 ships against the full weight of the Caliph armada. The humans used every trick they had. They flew in close where Caliph heavy weapons were useless. They targeted engines and weapon systems instead of trying to destroy entire ships. They drew enemy fire toward their own shields to protect weaker vessels. When a ship lost its weapons, its captain turned the bow toward the nearest enemy and accelerated. The Caliph kept coming. For every ship they lost, they had 100 more. The human fleet was being ground down. 60 ships, 50, 40. Each loss triggered the Promise. Each explosion took Caliph ships with it. But the numbers were overwhelming. On the Undying Soul, Nari reported damage after damage. Shields failing. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Port weapons array destroyed. She patched and rerouted and repaired with her bare hands, pulling cables through burning corridors, welding hull plates while the ship shook around her. Somi tracked the battle on her screens. The data told a simple story. They were losing. Slowly, painfully, bravely, but losing. The Caliph would reach Earth within the hour. Doyun gripped the arms of his wheelchair. His ship shuddered under another impact. Around him, his crew kept fighting. Nobody ran. Nobody asked to surrender. They just kept working, kept firing, kept flying. 30 ships left, then 25. Then the sensors screamed. Not an attack, something else. New contacts, hundreds of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel behind the Caliph fleet. Somi stared at her screen. Her hands trembled. "Captain," she said. Her voice cracked. "Captain, it is not just us anymore." The Galactic Coalition fleet arrived like a sunrise. Orvon led them. The ancient elder had spent weeks calling in every favor, every debt, every promise owed to the Council in 12,000 years. And he had not done it alone. Lumi, the young aide who had whispered a warning to the humans on their first day at Anthara, had personally transmitted the footage of Colony Maru to every inhabited world in the galaxy. She had attached a single message to every transmission. Today it is the humans. Tomorrow it will be you. The Fenari came, small, gentle beings who had never fought before, but who had watched the humans fight for strangers and decided that they could do the same. The Uthrin came, the Dren came, the Savi came, species that had spent centuries avoiding conflict, hiding from empires, keeping their heads down. They came because they had seen something at Colony Maru that they had never seen before, a people who would die for someone else, and they had decided that such people were worth dying for in return. Over 300 ships, not as powerful as the Caliph individually, but together with the humans, it was enough. The coalition fleet hit the Caliph from behind. The armada, already bleeding from the human defense, found itself caught between two forces. The formation that had seemed so overwhelming began to crack. Tejo, down to his last 4 vanguard ships, laughed out loud when he saw the coalition fleet on his sensors. He turned his ships around and dove back into the fight. The Caliph's supreme commander, Dreth's replacement, a veteran admiral named Korath, watched his tactical display turn from red to chaos. Ships burning on 2 fronts, communications breaking down. Captains calling for orders that he did not have. He gave the order to retreat. But it was too late for clean retreats. The coalition fleet and the human survivors closed in from both sides. The Caliph armada shattered. Ships fled in every direction. Some surrendered. Some fought to the end. Most simply ran, their engines burning bright as they fled back toward Caliph space. The Battle of Sol was over. Humanity survived. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council reconvened. The chamber on Anthara was full again, but it looked different now. There were more species present, more voices, more chairs. And in the front row, in a seat that had not existed before, sat Shin Jungwoo. He was bruised. He was exhausted. He had not slept properly in weeks. But he was there. Behind him, a holographic display showed the undying soul floating in orbit above Earth, surrounded by coalition ships from a dozen different species. They floated together in the blue light of Earth's sun, and they looked like the beginning of something new. Orvon rose. The Elder's crystalline body glowed brighter than anyone had ever seen. The Galactic Council has voted, Orvon announced. By unanimous decision, the human species is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Accord. He paused, and his voice carried something that sounded almost like pride. Not as Tier 9, not as newcomers, but as Tier 1, Protector Species, the highest rank this council can bestow. For their courage, for their sacrifice, and for reminding this galaxy what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. The chamber erupted. Hundreds of species, cheering, clicking, humming, flashing, every form of applause the galaxy had to offer. Jungwoo sat in his chair and breathed. In the back of the chamber, in the dark alcove where it had sat for centuries, the Pale One watched. And, for the first time in living memory, for the first time in longer than any being in that room could count, it smiled. The chamber slowly emptied. Diplomats filed out. Aides cleaned up datapads and holographic projectors. The lights dimmed. The Pale One sat alone in the quiet. I told them not to provoke the humans, it said softly, to no one. They never listen. They never do. It closed its ancient eyes. But perhaps this time something good came of it. And in the silence of the empty chamber, surrounded by the shadows of 12 billion years, the Pale One rested. Outside, Earth turned slowly in the light of its star, small and blue and impossibly stubborn. The home of a species that the galaxy had laughed at, underestimated, attacked, and nearly destroyed. A species that got back up every single time. And for the first time in a very long while, the galaxy felt a little bit different. A little bit braver. A little bit more human.